Welcome or welcome back. This is your Curious European friend, and today I'm reacting to a video called Why Russia and China Are Watching Nova Scotia. And I read the video description, and it seems to be something about a space launch pad or pod. I don't know what it's called exactly, but yeah, space launch something. And I have no idea, so I thought let's educate myself on this and take you along for the ride. So let's go ahead and see why other countries are watching what's happening right now in Nova Scotia.
3 weeks ago, the Canadian government quietly signed a $200 million deal for a spaceport that most Canadians have never heard of. And it may be one of the most strategically sound investments that Canada has made in years. The reason for that has something to do with where this launch pad sits and what that location unlocks that very few global launch sites can. There are over 14,000 active satellites orbiting Earth right now. Your phone's GPS, the weather forecast that you checked this morning, all of the invisible infrastructure that powers that runs through hardware in orbit. And the number of those satellites is about to grow dramatically. The world expects to launch up to 70,000 more satellites into low Earth orbit over the next 5 years.
So, wait, hold on. 70,000 more? What did she say? Or
and the number
in
of those satellites is about to grow dramatically. The world expects to launch up to 70,000 more satellites into low Earth orbit.
Okay, 70,000 more. So to begin with, I didn't even know there were that many. I don't know what to think. Expect of how many satellites there are right now, but 14,000, I guess sounds like a lot, but if you think about how big the Earth is, then yeah, I guess that makes sense that there's just so many. But 70,000 more in 5 years. That seems like a big jump in 5 years if they have 14,000 right now. Let's see.
Orbit over the next 5 years. The question of where those launches happen is now becoming vital for the world leaders. Most people think that a rocket launch is a straight line up. It's not. The orbit a satellite ends up in depends heavily on the direction it launches and the angle of its trajectory relative to the equator. That angle is called the orbital inclination. For a lot of the satellites that actually do useful work, like weather monitoring, Arctic surveillance, climate data collection, or recon, you want what's called a polar or sun-synchronous orbit. These orbits pass over the poles repeatedly, which means that a satellite in this orbit eventually scans the entire planet as Earth rotates beneath it. The United States built its major launch sites like Kennedy Space Center in Florida and Vandenberg in California for good reasons. Florida's low latitude gives rockets a natural boost from Earth's rotation. It's faster, closer to the equator, which is exactly what you want when you're launching heavy payloads into an orbit. These sites were purpose-built for the missions that the United States needed during the space race, and they're exceptional at what they do. But that's also where the constraint lies. To reach a polar or sun-synchronous orbit from Florida, you'd need to fly south, directly over South America. Flying north means crossing populated land, which is a safety issue. Vandenberg handles polar launches, but it's operating under real constraints. In October 2024, the California Coastal Commission rejected SpaceX's application to conduct 50 launches per year from the base. The reason? Environmental concerns and wildlife disturbance. All of that left SpaceX under a more limited permit at the only major US site capable of these orbits. Beyond the regulatory ceiling, it's also a military installation. So international operators like LI...
But it's like, why did they not think about that before they built all of that? Yeah, I guess I just wanted to expand the amount of times that they launched something. But I mean, yeah, I guess if you don't have another location that you could do it, then you have to go for something. But Yeah, I don't know.
Governments, foreign satellite companies, they can't really book a time at a US defense facility the way they'd book time at a neutral commercial port. Neither of these options that the US has works safely or efficiently. The physics of launching from mid-latitudes puts a hard ceiling on what these sites can do for the fastest growing segment of the satellite market. There are 3 things that you really need to reach these orbits cleanly. You need to launch from higher latitude, over open water, and with a clear flight path. That description fits a very small number of places on Earth, and that includes Alaska, Norway, and New Zealand. And the eastern and with a clear flight path.
High latitude, open water, and clear flight paths. Yeah.
That description fits a very small number of places on Earth, and that includes Alaska, Norway, and New Zealand, and the eastern tip of Nova Scotia. And that's exactly where Canada gets its spaceports. Spaceport's Nova Scotia sits on the Atlantic coast near Canso, at roughly 45 degrees north. Launches can go south over the open ocean with no population centers in the flight path.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's very strategic.
Or land-based wildlife affected. The site is designed to reach sun-synchronous orbit between 600 and 800 kilometers with a payload capacity of up to 5,000 kilograms. And all of that can be priced at $45 million per launch. Spaceport Nova Scotia is Canada's only operational launch site. The last one, Churchill Rocket Research Range.
Wait, hold on. Does that mean it cost $45 million for one launch?
Manitoba had largely fallen out of use by the late 1980s. In North America, the closest analogs would be Vandenberg in California and the Pacific Spaceport Complex in Kodiak Island in Alaska. Vandenberg is the dominant one. SpaceX runs dozens of Falcon 9 missions from there annually, but it is a heavily congested military range with heavy demand. Kodiak is smaller and less developed. Nova Scotia would be the first dedicated multi-user commercial spaceport in North America with access to these orbits. That geographical luck is why a company called Maritime Launch Services spent nearly a decade fighting for approvals to build here. Maritime Launch Services was founded in 2016 in Halifax. The original plan was straightforward: partner with Ukraine's Pivden Design Office to launch the Cyclone 4M rocket, a medium-lift vehicle that could put heavier payloads into polar orbit. They signed the land lease, cleared the environmental reviews, and broke ground in September 2022, 7 months after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine had already begun. MLS pressed ahead anyway, likely betting that the war would resolve soon and the Cyclone 4M supply chain would stabilize. But it didn't. By Q3 2024, after 2 years of sustained uncertainty, MLS terminated the agreement. For a company that had spent 8 years building toward one rocket, it was a significant blow. What happened next is the part we should be all paying attention to. Instead of folding or waiting for a new single partner, MLS shifted to what their CEO calls an airport model. Rather than owning and operating rockets, the spaceport leases its own facilities and services to launch vehicle providers, whoever shows up with a rocket that fits the site. It's lower risk, more flexible, and directly solves a real problem. The global launch market has more satellites waiting to fly than it has launch slots. Let me know in the comments, did you actually...
Wait, I didn't even consider that. Yeah, that's crazy. So you have like a airport for rockets. How do you ship those things? On boats? Big boats? Or I guess, right? That's crazy. So they're gonna ship those to Nova Scotia, and then yeah, that's really sound business model. That's crazy.
Actually know that there was already a rocket launch from Canadian soil last year. On November 20th, 2025, Spaceport Nova Scotia conducted its first successful launch. A Dutch company called T-Engineering.
Dutch. Why do the Dutch always show up? In a lot of videos I watched, there's something about the Netherlands. I'm like, I didn't even know what all we do.
Their Barracuda hypersonic test platform from Canso.
Wait, what?
It was the first. Spaceport Nova Scotia conducted its first successful launch. A Dutch company called T-Engineering flew their Barracuda hypersonic test platform from Canso. It was the first commercial hypersonic suborbital demonstration from spaceport Nova Scotia. 2 more Barracuda launches are scheduled for mid-2026. And a Quebec-based company called Reaction Dynamics has signed an agreement for an orbital launch no earlier than 2028. A South Korean firm, InnoSpace, signed a letter of intent in 2026 to evaluate hosting their Handbet launch system here. So this airport model is gaining significant traction. The question is whether the Canadian government was going to get out of the way and, more importantly, enable it further. And turns out it was. In March 2026, just a few weeks ago, the Canadian government announced a 10-year, $200 million lease agreement with Maritime Launch Services. The tenant is the Department of National Defence. The deal gives D&D a dedicated launch pad at Spaceport Nova Scotia to support the Canadian Armed Forces and broader government missions. The contract runs retroactive to April 2025 and pays $20 million per year. And it requires approximately 90% of those payments to go back into the Canadian industry and workforce. Now, that number, 200 million, is worth putting into context. Budget 2025 had already set aside $180 million over 3 years specifically for establishing sovereign launch capability. The government isn't just subsidizing this startup, it's treating our space launch infrastructure the same way that it would treat a port or an airbase. It's something that a country needs to control for itself. The reason for that is simple. Right now, if Canada needs to get a satellite into orbit, it has to book a slot on someone else's rocket. It could be a SpaceX or it could be a European provider. It could be any partner country. Now, booking the slot also means waiting, sometimes years in a queue behind other missions with other priorities. What our defense minister stated is that
years. It's a long time.
Canada doesn't want to be entirely dependent on third parties to launch its own satellites, because doing so is not just a hypothetical threat, it's a real one in the current realities. The Pentagon's 2024 Arctic strategy explicitly warned of Russian GPS jamming in the far north, aimed at the US, Canada, and its allies. And in March 2024, a 63-hour Russian jamming attack disrupted the navigation systems of over 1,600 passenger aircrafts across the Baltic region. Norwegian aviation recorded GPS interference on 44 out of the first 44 days of that year, tracing all of that to electronic warfare units on Russia's peninsulas. So for cases like this, when we have other countries running operations and jamming our GPS systems and probing Arctic shipping lanes, having an answer of "you're on the wait list to launch your satellites" is not really an acceptable answer for Canada. For that reason, Canada also announced its intention to become a full member of NATO's Starlift initiative. It's a project to build a space launch network that lets allied nations put payloads into orbit on short notice. Spaceport Nova Scotia is part of how Canada earns its seat at that table. Now, the $200 million announcement was just half of the story. On the same day, the government launched another $100 million grant program called Launch the North, selecting 3 Canadian rocket companies, Nord Space, Canada Rocket Company, and Reaction Dynamics, each receiving $8 million to develop homegrown launch vehicles targeting sovereign light lift capability by 2028. The whole point around this is that a launch pad alone, without a Canadian rocket, is still foreign dependent to an extent. So Canada's plan is to launch both.
Hold on. Oh, I'm looking there because there's the window. I think it's gonna storm. Anyways.
Where you launch rockets from and the rockets themselves. There's one more interesting thing that Nord Space is doing. It's also building its own spaceport on Newfoundland's Burin Peninsula, called the Atlantic Spaceport Complex. This construction has already cleared its environmental approvals in January 2026, so Nova Scotia isn't the only bet we're making, it's just the beginning. And this is where all of that connects directly back to the Artemis story. MDA Space, the same company that built all the Canadarms, has also made a strategic investment in maritime launch services. MDA's VP of Corporate Development now sits on the MLS board. So we have the robotic technology builder and the launch pad quietly teaming up together. So here's what the satellite market actually looks like right now, to put all of this into the context of why it matters so much right now. According to a report published earlier this year, the global small satellite market
is going down. I hope this is not messing with the lighting of my video.
Projected to grow from 9 billion all the way to 32 billion by 2030.
Okay, small satellite market. So it's projected to grow a lot. Okay, let's see what this actually means. This is North America. This is Europe. Europe is not doing really well then in that aspect. Asia Pacific, Middle East, and rest of the world. Okay.
So that launch bottleneck that we just talked about is real. The infrastructure to get the 70,000 satellites into orbit over 5 years does not yet exist at the scale that the world needs it at. The constraint is not so much the demand, but the physical capacity is here. And the spaceport Nova Scotia is designed to contribute to solving that problem. And it's solving these problems specifically for the orbits that Florida can reach efficiently. Every satellite in the world that needs a polar or sun-synchronous orbit is a potential customer for the spaceport based out of Nova Scotia.
Yeah, this seems like a really, really good idea and investment, because it seems like it's going to make them a lot of money then if it can be used as an airport and other countries are going to launch their rockets. Now, I don't know what to think about like the price that they would ask and the money that they would get to launch these rockets, but I can only assume, I think she said like one launch cost 45 million. I can only assume that it is gonna make them quite some money. Also, of course they have to invest, but it seems like a really good thing, especially for Canada right now, to build even more, independence with everything that's going on. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah. For Canada, this is less about national symbolism. It's a lot more practical. First, it's sovereign control. This creates a path for Canadian military and intelligence satellites to launch from Canadian soil on Canadian timelines. And that matters enormously in a world where geopolitical tensions can disrupt access to allies' launch manifests overnight. And to make it concrete, Canada plans to launch approximately 200 Telesat satellites next year as a sovereign broadband alternative to Starlink, particularly for Arctic coverage. And that's a constellation that Canada will want to control the timing and the terms of entirely on its own. Second, it's Arctic monitoring. The orbits that Spaceport Nova Scotia is designed for are exactly the ones that you'd use to watch the Northwest Passage, monitor Arctic shipping lanes, and track climate change at high latitudes. Canada has a sovereignty stake in the Arctic that no other country shares, so having that launch infrastructure to put monitoring satellites into those orbits without asking for anyone's permission is a concrete, vital capability for the country. And third, it's the economic footprint. The spaceport is in the municipality of the District of Guysborough, the rural Atlantic Canada. The D&D deal alone requires 90% of those payments to flow back into the Canadian industry. And that means more high-quality, high-paying jobs for the region and for the province. And we already know that according to research done by the Canadian Space Agency, every dollar invested into the space development programs returns nearly 4 times more. So the math on a $200 million investment is pretty
So I guess there's the answer of like, I was thinking how much would they, return on the investment, would they get back? That's a good deal.
Self-explanatory. And more on that in the future, because there's a lot more happening in the Canadian space economy picture. And let us know in the comments if you want for us to cover it soon. Now, this video isn't a commercial for a government space project. So let's be clear about a couple of things here. First, MLS's original rocket, the Cyclone 4M, is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. The airport model means that the spaceport's long-term launch volume depends directly on attracting multiple rocket operators over time. The agreements that are currently in place are mostly letters of intent and suborbital partnerships. Reaction Dynamics orbital launch isn't until a couple of years from now, at the earliest. So getting to high annual launch cadence, the kind of volume that makes this economics genuinely work, requires a much broader commercial launch market to develop as expected. And it requires MLS to keep winning customers. The company is also publicly traded on the CBOE Canada Exchange under the ticker MAXQ, and it's a small cap. And it's a stock that we're quietly watching, and it's not an investment advice. So we live in exciting times because the spaceport is happening soon, and the government is willing to support it. And the orbital advantage that Canada has is unlike anywhere else in the world. So the biggest question mark there is the commercial track record, and how far can we pick it up? In our video about the Artemis 2 mission, the line that we kept coming back to was that Canada made itself irreplaceable by building the one thing that the mission needed the most at the time. Spaceport Nova Scotia is similar, but also a different kind of bet. It's less about a single mission and more about building the infrastructure. Canada is building the place where the next generation of satellites leaves the ground. And we're building it in a location that's very unique and valuable. It's something that no American site can replicate well. We went from building the arm that assembles space stations to hosting the pad that launches the constellations that monitor the planet. That progression is not accidental. It's intentional, but it is taking a long time. So we're excited to see where it lands us. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and thank you to...
I like that pun, if it was intended, where it lands us, but yeah. I'm assuming that this is the first real, or will be the first real kind of airport for rocket launches then in the world, right? If I, heard that correctly, because it seems like there's no other thing like it in the world right now. So that would be very beneficial for Canada. Like she said, yeah, they would probably have to, it would take maybe some time to get more and more clients, but I can imagine that they will struggle ultimately with getting people to, or countries to launch their rockets from there if there are limited options. So I think it's a very smart and beneficial thing to do for Canada, especially right now. And I love that you guys have the luck that you just have this the ultimate space to launch these rockets into space. So yeah, I think that's a good thing. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. I didn't know about this. I don't know much about space and rockets in general, so I don't know how much of this I understood, but I think I understood the message, the most important. They're building a sort of airport for rocket launches, so yeah, again, I think that is a good beneficial thing for Canada and probably also for other countries who are going to launch their rockets there. So anyways, yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you in my next video very, very soon.